is Shakespeare's manuscripts that could be buried at Oak Island?
I don't know, but what is bookbinding material doing at those depths in the money pit?
The Oak Island curse is said to require 7 lives before it gives up its treasure. For Craig Tester, this legend became a terrifying reality. The fellowship was shattered first by the sudden tragic loss of his teenage son Drake, and then by the passing of the island's patriarch Dan Blankenship. To put it mildly, Craig was at a breaking point, staring into an abyss of grief. What many overlooked was that his next move wouldn't be about finding treasure, but about confronting the curse head-on and deciding if the price was simply too high. The Son's final chapter. The world of The Curse of Oak Island is built on a foundation of mystery, machinery, and the relentless drive of men obsessed with history. For years, viewers watched the Lagina brothers, along with a dedicated team, pour their hearts and fortunes into a windswept island in Nova Scotia. Among them was Craig Tester, an engineer and a man of logic whose expertise in drilling was as crucial as any map. But what made Craig's journey truly special was the young man often by his side, his son, Drake Tester. Drake wasn't just a background character, he was the vibrant, youthful energy of the fellowship. He represented the future of the quest, a legacy in the making. You see, the bond between Craig and Drake was something that transcended the show. It was a classic father-son story playing out against the backdrop of one of the world's greatest treasure hunts.
Hope springs eternal, but for this evening, I think we're done.
Yeah.
Right.
Drake, with his infectious enthusiasm, was a natural on the island. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, working alongside seasoned veterans like the Laginas and Dan Blankenship. He shared his father's passion for problem-solving and adventure, and their shared moments on screen were genuine and heartwarming. Many people are crazy about the complex theories of the island, but it was this simple human connection that truly resonated with millions of viewers. They weren't just watching a treasure hunt, they were watching a father and son making memories. The thing nobody tells you about life, however, is how quickly it can change. Behind the scenes, Drake was fighting a private battle. Since he was a young boy, he had dealt with a seizure disorder. The most shocking fact for many who are unfamiliar with epilepsy is that for 99% of the time, life can seem completely normal. Drake lived a full and active life, never letting his condition define him or hold him back from the adventures he loved. He was a beacon of positivity. But on March 26, 2017, the unthinkable happened. At just 16 years old, Drake's journey came to a tragic and sudden end due to complications from his condition. The news was a shockwave that rocked the entire Oak Island family and its global fan base. To put it mildly, the grief was overwhelming. For Craig Tester, the logical problem-solving engineer, this was a problem with no solution. It was a raw human tragedy that no amount of expertise or machinery could fix. The search for treasure, which had been a source of joy and bonding with his son, suddenly seemed meaningless.
Now that looks like a stone road.
Why don't you do one more right along here, but a little deeper?
Okay.
The man who could analyze complex geological data was now faced with analyzing a future without his child. The pain was immense, and the Oak Island Fellowship, known for its tight-knit camaraderie, wrapped its arms around the Tester family. The Lagina brothers, who had treated Drake like a nephew, were devastated. The show dedicated an entire episode to his memory, a somber and beautiful tribute that showed just how deeply his loss was felt. But for Craig, the question was immediate and paralyzing. How do you even begin to move forward? His grief was a silent character in the following season. Craig chose to step back from the island for a time, a decision every fan understood and respected. The war room felt emptier, the digs less joyful. The quest, which had always been tinged with the hope of discovery, was now shrouded in a heavy cloak of loss. What many overlooked during this period was the profound strength it took for Craig to even consider returning. He later shared that being on Oak Island in a strange way helped him focus on the passion he had shared with his son. It was a way to honor Drake's memory, to continue the adventure they started together. The treasure hunt was no longer just about gold or artifacts. For Craig, it became a pilgrimage of remembrance. His son was gone, but his spirit remained etched into the very soil of the island. A legend's farewell. If Drake Tester represented the future of the Oak Island quest, then Dan Blankenship was its living, breathing past. For more than 50 years, long before the cameras and global fame, Dan was on the island digging, searching, and believing. He was the grizzled, no-nonsense patriarch of the treasure hunt, a man whose personal quest had become the stuff of legend. You can see this everywhere on the island. His fingerprints are on nearly every major search effort of the last half-century. Dan wasn't just a part of the team, he was the island's anchor, its soul. He had sacrificed relationships, comfort, and a conventional life for a dream buried deep beneath the Nova Scotian soil. His home on the island was a museum of artifacts and theories, and his mind was a library of every failed attempt and every glimmer of hope.
You can see I probably put in 10 to 12 holes in that field, and without a question, we hit cribbing and we hit wood.
For Craig Tester, a relative newcomer compared to Dan, the old treasure hunter was more than a colleague. He was a mentor and a source of unwavering inspiration. In a world of high-tech sonar and advanced drilling rigs, Dan represented the old school of grit and intuition. He had seen it all, from the collapse of Borehole 10X, a project he had poured years of his life into, to the discovery of the enigmatic 90-foot stone. His belief in the treasure was infectious, and his resilience was the engine that powered the entire operation. The bond between the methodical engineer Craig and the seasoned veteran Dan was one of deep mutual respect. They were two different generations of searcher, united by a singular, consuming passion. But not all things are what they seem, and time, unlike treasure, is a resource that eventually runs out for everyone. Dan had lived a long and incredibly full life, and as the seasons on the show progressed, viewers saw him slow down. He remained a fixture in the war room, his sharp mind and pointed questions still guiding the team, but his days of physically manning the digs were behind him. He had passed the torch to the Laginas and their team, trusting them to carry on the search he had dedicated his life to. What many overlooked was just how much of his own life force he had poured into that island. He once famously said he'd solve the mystery or run out of time trying. In 2019, at the age of 95, Dan Blankenship's incredible journey came to a peaceful end. He hadn't found the main treasure vault, but in many ways he had found something else. A fellowship of believers who would ensure his 50-plus-year quest would not be in vain. For the Oak Island team, his passing was the end of an era. The island felt profoundly different without its steadfast guardian. For Craig Tester, it was another devastating loss, compounding the grief he was still navigating. He had lost his son, the future of the hunt, and now he had lost his mentor, the keeper of its past. The team was now adrift, missing two of its most important members. The loss of Dan was different from the sharp, tragic blow of losing Drake, but it was just as impactful. It was the quiet closing of a legendary chapter. The treasure hunt now rested squarely on the shoulders of the remaining fellowship. Craig, who had returned to the island to honor his son, now had another spirit to honor. The weight on his shoulders grew heavier. The quest had always been difficult, a puzzle that fought back with every shovel of dirt. Now it was also a memorial, a tribute to the two incredible souls they had lost along the way. The search continued, but it was forever changed, haunted by the ghosts of those who had given it their all. First his son, now his mentor, the island was taking more than it was giving. Counting the fallen lives. Many people are crazy about the Oak Island curse. It's a chilling piece of folklore that has shadowed the island for centuries, a prophecy whispered by treasure hunters and locals alike. The legend states that 7 people must meet their end in the quest for the treasure before the island will reveal its secrets. For a long time, it was just that, a legend.
We found treasure on Oak Island.
Yeah, we did.
We've been, and it's woohoo, woot woot.
It was a spooky story that added to the island's mystique, a dramatic flair for a 200-year-old mystery. But as the years turned into decades, the legend began to feel less like fiction and more like a grim tally. Before the show even began, 6 men had already lost their lives in various accidents related to the treasure hunt, starting with a man in 1861 when a pump boiler exploded. The thing nobody tells you about a curse is how it preys on the mind, especially in the face of real-world tragedy. When Drake Tester passed away, the whispers grew louder. Fans and followers of the story couldn't help but do the math. Was Drake the 7th? The most shocking fact is that depending on how you count the historical incidents, his tragic passing fit the prophecy with terrifying precision. For a team grounded in science and logic, this was an uncomfortable and deeply unsettling coincidence. They would never say the curse was real, but the emotional weight of the legend became impossible to ignore. It was no longer just a tale. It was a shadow that hung over every dig, every discovery, and every member of the team. For Craig Tester, a man who deals in facts and figures, this must have been a private nightmare. How do you reconcile the scientific reality of your son's medical condition with the chilling folklore of the island you both loved? The island had become the backdrop for the greatest tragedy of his life. Now, that tragedy was being woven into the island's darkest legend. It's a psychological burden that is hard to even fathom. And you can see this everywhere in the show's later seasons. A certain gravity, a somberness that wasn't there before. The quest was no longer a grand adventure. It was a mission fraught with emotional peril. The potential reward of treasure seemed to pale in comparison to the price that had already been paid. Then came the loss of Dan Blankenship. While he passed away peacefully of natural causes at 95, his departure still felt connected to the island's heavy toll. He had given his entire adult life to the island. He didn't perish in a collapsed tunnel, but one could argue the island took everything he had all the same. The Fellowship was now wrestling not just with flood tunnels and mysterious structures, but with the very real human cost of their obsession. The curse was no longer about a supernatural force, it was about the real-life dangers, the years lost, and the hearts broken along the way. What many overlooked is that the true curse of Oak Island might not be a prophecy at all. Perhaps the real curse is the obsession itself, the relentless hope that drives people to sacrifice everything for a dream that may never come true. It's a curse of what if, a siren song of untold riches and historical secrets that has lured people in for over 200 years. For Craig Tester, the island had given him a profound bond with his son, and then it had become the setting for his deepest sorrow.
We'll find the shallow supposed treasure from this vault area.
It had given him a mentor in Dan, and then it had taken him too. The question for him was no longer just where is the treasure, but is it worth it? The island had claimed its seventh soul one way or another. What could it possibly demand next? People watching the show after these back-to-back losses all wondered the same thing. How can Craig Tester keep going? What could possibly motivate him to return to a place so intertwined with pain? The thing is, when you're looking from the outside, it's easy to assume that walking away would be the only logical choice. But for Craig, the answer was far more complex. The island wasn't just a place of loss, it was also the last place where he and Drake had shared their unique adventure. It was a place where Drake's memory was vibrantly, tangibly alive. Walking away might have felt like leaving his son behind a second time. So, what's next for Craig? His return to the island wasn't a return to business as usual, it was a redefinition of his entire purpose there. What many overlooked was the subtle shift in his demeanor. He was still the brilliant engineer, the calm and steady hand on the technical side of the operation. But there was a new depth, a quiet determination that seemed to go beyond the search for gold. He was no longer just chasing history, he was building a legacy for his son. Each successful core sample, each new discovery was no longer just a clue to the treasure. It was a tribute to Drake. It was a way of saying, we're still in this together. The treasure hunt became his mechanism for healing, a way to channel his grief into the very thing that had brought him and his son so much joy. So what do you think? Is the Oak Island quest a noble pursuit of history or a dangerous obsession with a devastating price? Let us know below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.